Without me, you're just a diner girl. Nobody would notice. He said it loud enough for the whole square to hear. Phones came out. People stopped. And Maddie Cole, standing behind a charity booth, spatula in hand, blonde hair pulled back, looked at her ex-boyfriend and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not shame, not fear, something closer to certainty. Because Brandon Mercer had just made the worst mistake of his life in front of half of Red Mesa. And he had no idea her father was already reaching for his phone. If this story hits something real in you, subscribe to this channel right now and follow every part of Maddie's story through to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Saturday morning of the Red Mesa Community Fundraiser started the way most Saturdays did for Maddie Cole, with burnt coffee, a missing inventory order, and Diane Keller standing at the back door of the Desert Rose Grill yelling about the paper napkin supply like the fate of the entire town depended on it. We've got 400 people showing up to that square in 3 hours. Madison, 400. And we have approximately 47 napkins. 62. Maddie corrected without looking up from the clipboard. I counted them this morning. That is not better. Maddie finally looked up and handed Diane a sheet of paper. Supply order. Placed yesterday. Jimmy from the warehouse is dropping it off at 10. Diane stared at the paper. Then she stared at Maddie. Sometimes I think you run this place better than I do. Most of the time, Maddie said, and went back to the clipboard. It was the kind of morning Maddie genuinely loved. Organized noise. A clear list of things to accomplish. People counting on her to make sure everything ran without disaster. She was 27 years old, assistant manager of the best diner in Red Mesa, and she had built exactly the kind of steady, self-sufficient life she'd wanted since she was 18 years old, and told her father she needed to find out who she was on her own terms. He hadn't argued. That was one of the things people never understood about Razor Cole when they heard his name. But nobody in Red Mesa knew that name. Maddie had made sure of that. By 10:30, the Desert Rose Grill's outdoor booth was set up in the town square. Folding tables, a grill, stacks of containers, hand-lettered signs announcing that all proceeds went to the Red Mesa Family Support Fund. Diane was directing the younger staff with the focused energy of a woman conducting military operations. Maddie was moving between the booth and the crowd, collecting donation envelopes, checking on the food prep, making sure the folding chairs were lined up straight. The square was filling up. That was the thing about Red Mesa that Maddie genuinely loved. When the town decided to come together, it actually showed up. Families with strollers, older couples in lawn chairs, kids running in circles while their parents tried to have conversations. The local hardware store had sent a table of volunteers. The church had sent a pie booth. Someone had brought a bluegrass duo who were setting up near the fountain. It was the kind of afternoon that made Red Mesa feel like a place worth staying. Maddie was carrying a stack of donation receipts back to the booth when she heard it. Not words, not yet, just a laugh. A specific kind of laugh. The kind that carries across a crowd. Because it isn't meant to be shared, it's meant to be overheard. Sharp at the edges. Too confident. The kind of laugh that expects everyone nearby to agree with whatever produced it. Maddie knew that laugh. She stopped walking. A black pickup truck had parked near the edge of the square. Not in a designated spot, just pulled up close. Nose angled toward the crowd, the way a vehicle parks, when the driver assumes the rules apply to other people. 3 men were climbing out. 2 of them Maddie didn't know well, Derek Winslow and Paul Stanton. Both part of Brandon's circle. Both wearing the kind of casual weekend clothes that cost more than Maddie made in a week. They were laughing at something on one of their phones. The third man was Brandon Mercer. He was wearing a gray button-down shirt and sunglasses, and he was scanning the square with the expression he always wore in public, not quite smiling, but positioned to smile, like he was waiting for the moment when the room would acknowledge him. He was 31 years old, built like someone who paid a lot of money for that build, with the easy posture of a man who had never had to wonder whether he would be welcomed somewhere. He found what he was looking for. His eyes landed on Maddie. She didn't look away. She had learned a long time ago that looking away from Brandon felt like flinching, and she had stopped letting him make her flinch 6 weeks ago when she sat across from him at the table in his kitchen and told him quietly and firmly that she was done. He hadn't believed her. He still didn't. Matta turned and walked back to the booth. "Diane," she said, her voice completely level. "Brandon is here." Diane didn't even look up from the grill. "Is he going to be a problem?" Maddie thought about it honestly. Probably. Diane reached for a serving spoon with the energy of a woman reaching for a weapon. Then let him come. Brandon and his two friends moved through the square with the slow pace of people who weren't there to donate. They stopped at a few tables, said something that made Derek laugh too loudly, and worked their way gradually toward the Desert Rose booth. The way water works, its way toward a drain, not obviously direct, but inevitable. When Brandon finally reached the front of the booth, he stopped and tilted his sunglasses down. "Maddie." He said her name the way someone might say it if they were pleasantly surprised to see a piece of furniture they used to own. "Brandon." She handed a donation receipt to the woman in front of her, smiled at the woman, and waited. He leaned against the edge of the table with one elbow and looked at the booth with an expression that managed to be both bored and critical simultaneously. "This is sweet. Charity work. Very you." "It's a fundraiser," Maddie said. "Were you planning to donate?" "Maybe." He tilted his head. "Depends on what we're raising money for." "Red Mesa Family Support Fund." "It helps?" "Yeah, I know what it is." He waved a hand. "My father's company donated last year." Sizeable check. Very public. He paused just long enough to let that land. "You might have seen the announcement." Maddie handed another receipt to another customer. "I was busy." The crowd around the booth had developed a quality that Maddie recognized. It was the quality a crowd gets when something is happening that isn't quite a scene yet, but everyone senses it's coming. The conversation slightly quieted. People found reasons to stay within range. Nobody was obviously watching, but everyone was watching. Brandon seemed to notice it too. And Maddie saw the thing she had hoped wasn't true. He liked it. He had come here wanting an audience, and the audience had arrived right on schedule. Derek and Paul drifted slightly to Brandon's left and right, the spatial arrangement of men who have been appointed an audience. "You look good," Brandon said. The compliment landed like something hollow, like the word was right, but the intention was wrong. "A little tired, but good." "Thank you," Maddie said flatly. He nodded slowly, looking at the booth again. "So this is what you've been doing with your Saturdays?" Since we broke up," Maddie said, because she had learned that naming the thing directly took away his ability to circle around it. His jaw tightened slightly. Then he relaxed it. He was good at controlling his face in public. It was one of the things she had once thought was composure. Now she understood it for what it was: practice. "We didn't break up," he said, with the tone of someone correcting a minor factual error. "You walked out on a good thing because of whatever issue you had that particular week." A woman nearby had stopped pretending to look at the pie booth. A man 2 tables over had slowed his eating down. Maddie picked up the next donation envelope and wrote out a receipt. Her handwriting was perfectly steady. "Are you here for the fundraiser, Brandon?" she asked again. "Or is there something you wanted to say to me?" "I wanted to check on you." He said it with a smile that didn't reach anything. "Since your friends clearly can't." "You've been telling people I treated you badly." "Maddie, I'm hearing things, and I wanted to give you the chance to correct the record in person." "The record is correct," she said. The smile stayed exactly where it was. "You know what's interesting?" he said, and his voice changed slightly, not louder, but more projected. "The kind of shift public speakers make when they want the row in the back to hear without appearing to address them. I spent 2 years taking you places you'd never been, introducing you to people, buying you things, and you walked away and started acting like I was the problem." A few more people had stopped moving. Maddie's colleague Jess was watching from the back of the booth with an expression that said she was about 30 seconds from saying something herself. Maddie caught Jess's eye and gave the smallest shake of her head. "Not yet." "I bought most of those things myself, Brandon," Maddie said calmly. "I have receipts." Something shifted in his posture. "Not much. Just enough." "Right," he said, drawing the word out. The receipts. He glanced at Derek with the expression of a man sharing an inside joke. Derek cooperated with a low sound that was almost a chuckle. You know what I never understood? Why you always had to have everything documented, everything recorded, every little transaction, like you were always building a case. Maddie picked up the next receipt pad. I work with money every day, she said. Keeping records is professional. It's also a little paranoid. His eyes moved over the crowd in the booth's vicinity, casual and deliberate at once. Or it would be, if you had anything worth protecting. Which I mean, it's a diner, Maddie. He spread his hands. It's a nice diner, but it's a diner. The space around the booth had gotten measurably quieter. Maddie looked at him steadily. She was aware of her own pulse, aware of the heat in her face, aware of the specific humiliation of having someone reduce the thing you were most proud of to an afterthought in front of a crowd. But she was also aware of something else. 3 phones were out, held at angles that weren't quite casual. Diane had moved 10 feet closer without appearing to move at all. And near the edge of the crowd, Officer Daniel Reyes was standing beside his patrol vehicle, watching with no expression she could read. You spent 2 years pretending to be somebody, Brandon said. His voice was conversational, almost pleasant. That was what made it land the way it did. Following me to events I invited you to, meeting people through me, acting like you had some kind of real position when, and this is what kills me, you were waitressing the whole time. The word waitressing came out with a particular texture, not just descriptive, deliberate. Assistant manager, Maddie said. Of a diner, he smiled. I know how you introduced yourself to people. I heard you. She works in restaurant management. Like it was some kind of career. It is a career, Maddie. He said her name with a patience that was worse than cruelty. I'm not trying to hurt you. I genuinely want you to understand what you had. What you gave up because of some stubborn point you were trying to make. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, not his phone, an actual printed photograph, which meant he had come here prepared for this exact moment. I found this last week. Beach trip. 2 summers ago. Remember that? He unfolded it and held it so the nearest people could see. Maddie in a bright yellow swimsuit on a beach somewhere north of Tucson, squinting into the sun and laughing at something off camera. Genuinely happy. She remembered the moment. She also remembered that the trip had been Brandon's idea, Brandon's plan, and that every single decision of those 3 days had been made by Brandon, including what time they woke up, where they ate, and what time they left. Look how happy you were, Brandon said, because of what I gave you. He turned the photograph slightly so more people could see it. Without me, you're just a diner girl nobody would notice. Those were the words, said in the specific register of a man who wanted them heard, wanted them recorded, wanted them to follow Maddie Cole around this square and maybe beyond it. Said in front of a crowd at a charity fundraiser on a Saturday afternoon, with a photograph being held up like evidence of ownership. The space around the booth was completely silent now. And for just 1 second, just one, Maddie felt the full weight of standing there in her work clothes behind a folding table while Brandon Mercer stood in front of a crowd with a photograph of her happiness in his hand. Then she looked at him and said, "Are you finished?" Not shouted, not trembling, not defiant in a theatrical way, just a question, quiet and complete. The question destroyed him more effectively than any response he had scripted for, because it treated everything he'd said not as devastating or hurtful, but as a nuisance. Something to be wrapped up. Something that was taking time away from the work she was there to do. Brandon's smile dropped for exactly 1 second. Then it came back, too wide. You know what your problem is? He said. You never knew what you were worth. I knew exactly what I was worth, Maddie said. That's why I left. Behind him, Derek had stopped laughing. Paul was looking at his shoes. And Brandon, for the first time since he'd walked across that square, looked like a man whose calculation was not adding up the way it was supposed to. He took 1 step back. Then he looked at the donation box sitting at the front of the table, a cardboard box with a plastic lid, half full of folded bills and envelopes. He looked at it the way someone looks at a chess piece just before they pick it up. "Brandon," Maddie said, and there was a warning in her voice that was subtle enough that he probably couldn't hear it. He picked up the donation box. He dumped it. Every folded bill, every sealed envelope, every coin that had been dropped through the slot across caught the pavement of the town square in a broad arc of paper and sound. The crowd made a sound that wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite silence. Something between the two. Then Brandon stepped forward and knocked the serving tray from the counter with one clean sweep of his forearm. Plates clattered. Cups hit the ground. Food spread across the pavement in the specific way that food spreads when it lands wrong, ugly, and immediate, and impossible to ignore. Maddie went down to one knee to start collecting the donation envelopes before they blew away. She didn't do it out of fear. She did it because those envelopes were people's money, and the money was not going to blow away because Brandon Mercer had a tantrum. Behind her, she heard Brandon laughing. And somewhere in the crowd toward the back, from a voice she didn't recognize, she heard someone else laugh with him. It was that second laugh that landed hardest, not Brandon's. The stranger's. The laugh of someone who didn't know her, didn't have a history with her, didn't have any particular reason to side with the man standing over a woman kneeling on the ground, but laughed anyway because Brandon was rich and confident and the woman was on her knees. Jess was already beside her, gathering envelopes. Diane had moved to the front of the booth with an expression that could have stripped paint. Officer Reyes had taken 3 steps toward the booth. Maddie's phone was in her apron pocket. It had been vibrating intermittently for the last 10 minutes. She had been ignoring it. She stayed on one knee and looked up at Brandon. His friends were not laughing anymore. The crowd was not making any sound at all. Brandon was still smiling, but the smile had the quality of something stretched too far, the expression of a man who expected a bigger reaction than the one he was getting and couldn't figure out why. The silence felt like losing. Maddie gathered the last of the envelopes. She stood up. She looked at him, and she thought about the phone in her pocket. She thought about the call she hadn't answered. She thought about him 70 miles away, who had spent her entire adult life waiting for her to ask him for exactly one thing. And she thought about the fact that Brandon Mercer had just told an entire crowd that she had nobody. That thought almost made her smile, because she knew something about herself that Brandon had spent 2 years dismissing, ignoring, and failing to ask about. He had assumed that the mystery of her family was a source of embarrassment. He had assumed, in the specific way that men like Brandon Mercer assume things, that the silence meant absence, that the privacy meant poverty, that the walls she kept meant there was nothing worth seeing behind them. He had never once considered the alternative. Maddie reached into her apron pocket. She looked at the screen. 4 missed calls and 1 text sent 11 minutes ago. She read it, standing in the middle of the square with Brandon still 3 feet away. The text said, "Saw the photo." She typed back, "I'm okay. Don't come yet." She put the phone back in her pocket because Maddie Cole had made a decision, standing there on that Saturday afternoon in the Red Mesa town square with food scattered across the pavement and a crowd of people recording her on their phones. She had decided that Brandon Mercer was going to finish revealing himself completely before she asked for any help at all. There was more to show. There was more he would do, given enough rope, and Maddie intended to let him have every inch of it. She turned back to the booth. "Let's get this cleaned up," she said to Jess, loud enough for the crowd to hear. And she went back to work. The laugh faded before Brandon even walked away. That was the first thing Maddie noticed, the way the energy shifted. The moment she stood back up, he had expected her to crumble, to cry in front of the crowd, or rage, or beg him to stop. He had engineered the whole afternoon for exactly that reaction. And when it didn't come, when she simply stood up and told Jess to help clean up and went back to handing out receipts, like the man was a passing inconvenience, something collapsed in the space around him. Derek and Paul had already stepped back. Brandon lingered another 30 seconds. Long enough to make it look like leaving was his idea. Then he said something low to Derek that Maddie didn't catch, and the 3 of them walked back toward the black pickup with the unhurried pace of men who were walking faster than they appeared to be. Diane watched them go. Then she turned back to the booth and picked up a serving spoon and handed it to Maddie without a word. Maddie took it. They worked. Officer Reyes came to the booth 15 minutes later. He didn't announce himself, just appeared at the side of the table and waited until Maddie looked up. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I saw what happened, the whole thing." "I know you did." Another pause. "You want to file a report?" Maddie looked at him directly. Daniel Reyes was one of those officers who wore his honesty on the outside, not naive, not soft, but genuinely committed to getting things right in a way that had probably cost him a few easy promotions over the years. She had always respected that about him, even when they'd barely spoken more than a few words at the booth on fundraiser days. "Not yet," she said, "but I want you to remember exactly what you saw." He nodded slowly. "I'll remember." He left. Maddie watched him go, then pulled her phone from her pocket. Her father had not texted again. That was typical. Razor Cole was not a man who sent follow-up messages when he was waiting for an answer. He asked once, and then he waited, and his waiting had the quality of something loaded and still. She put the phone away and helped finish the cleanup. But something had already started that Brandon didn't know about yet. 3 different people had recorded the whole thing. One of them, a woman named Carol Sims, who ran the quilt booth for the church group and had been standing 12 feet away, had gotten nearly 4 minutes of clean video. Brandon's voice was clear. His words were clear. The arc of donation envelopes hitting the pavement was clear. The serving tray going over. Maddie on her knees. Brandon laughing. All of it. Carol wasn't online much, but her daughter was. And her daughter had been at the fundraiser too, standing just behind her mother. And by the time Brandon's pickup had reached the end of the main block, the video was already uploaded. Maddie didn't know that yet. What she did know was that she had a decision to make. Not about Brandon. That decision had been made 6 weeks ago when she sat across from him and told him it was done. Not about the phone call she hadn't returned. She knew what she was going to say when she made it. What she had to decide was how much of the truth to let out, and when, and in what order. Because the truth about Maddie Cole was complicated in ways that Brandon Mercer had never bothered to understand. She had let him believe what he wanted to believe. That had been partly kindness. She hadn't wanted to define herself by her family any more than she wanted to define herself by her job title. But it had also been strategy, even if she hadn't called it that at the time. She had watched Brandon's face whenever he saw something that impressed him, a person with money, a name he recognized, a connection that could be useful. She had seen the way his respect shifted upward when certain things were revealed and downward when they weren't. And she had thought from very early in their relationship that she wanted someone who respected her for the things she had built herself, not for who her father was. That test had answered itself. He had spent 2 years dismissing the things she had built. Her job, her friendships, her way of managing money and planning ahead, and knowing exactly what she was doing at every moment. He had treated all of it as evidence of smallness, of limitation, of someone who hadn't been given access to the right rooms yet. It had never occurred to him that she had seen those rooms and found them empty. Maddie had grown up in a world most people only encountered in movies or news stories. And the first thing she had learned was that power without discipline was just destruction wearing a leather vest. Her father had drilled that into her from an age when she barely understood what it meant. Razor Cole was feared across 3 states. He was also the man who had driven 11 hours through a February storm to sit at her hospital bed when she had her appendix out at 19, and had sat in the plastic chair all night and held her hand and told anyone who tried to move him that they were welcome to try. He had never asked her to be grateful for who he was. He had only ever asked her to know who she was. She thought about that while she finished the afternoon shift at the fundraiser booth, while she helped pack everything into the van, while she drove back to the restaurant with Diane riding beside her, not saying anything for a long time. Finally, Diane said, "That man has problems that go back a lot further than you." "I know that," Maddie said. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to let this afternoon work for a while." Diane turned to look at her. Work. People recorded it, Diane, probably more than one person. And Brandon just humiliated a woman at a charity fundraiser in front of 300 people in a town where everyone knows his family's name and has an opinion about it. She kept her eyes on the road. I'm going to let that information move the way information moves. And then I'm going to make some calls. Diane was quiet for a moment. You've been planning for something like this. Maddie didn't answer right away. Then she said, I've been prepared. There's a difference that night. Maddie sat at her kitchen table with a manila folder, a laptop, and her phone. The folder held documents she had been assembling quietly for months, not with any dramatic intention. Not because she had foreseen this specific afternoon, but because she was the kind of person who kept records as naturally as breathing. Receipts, screenshots, printed copies of text messages sent between 2 and 4 in the morning when Brandon's control over his own tone had slipped. A letter from his attorney that had arrived 6 weeks after the breakup, claiming she owed the return of gifts that she had documentary proof of purchasing herself. She organized everything into a specific order. Then she called her father. He picked up on the first ring, the way he always did when he was expecting her call. Hey, baby. Hey, Dad. 2 words. The line was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet she could hear the particular background sounds of the clubhouse low voices. Something being moved in the kitchen, the distant sound of a television or music. Tell me what happened, he said. She told him. Not in the way she would have told anyone else, not with softened edges or reduced details to protect him from worrying. She told him, because Razor Cole did not need to be protected from the truth, and he had always treated her the same way. When she was done, he didn't say anything for a long moment. He put his hands on your property, Razor said. The Booth property. Technically, it was the fundraisers. He knocked things out of your hands. Yes. Another pause. Are you hurt? No. Are you telling me the truth? Dad, okay. A long exhale. Okay. What do you want to do? That question. She had heard it her entire life, and it never stopped meaning something. Other people's fathers told them what to do. Her father asked what she wanted and then figured out how to support it. There were people who thought that was weakness, a biker boss deferring to his daughter. Those people did not understand Raymond Cole. I have documentation, she said. I have witnesses. I have a police officer who watched the whole thing. And I have video, I'm pretty sure, though I don't have access to it yet. I want to handle this through proper channels. I want what he did documented. I want it to follow him. And you need me to do what? Exactly. I need you to not do anything yet, she said. And I need you to be available when I ask. Razor was quiet. That's hard, he said. Finally, I know. I'm looking at a photograph of my daughter on her knees on a parking lot because some boy thought it was funny. Maddie closed the manila folder. I stood back up, Dad. I know you did. His voice had a quality in it that he only used with her, something between pride and pain that she had never heard him use with anyone else. I know you did, baby. I'm asking you to trust the way I want to handle this. I trust you. I always have. He paused again. How much room are you giving me? Enough to be available. Not enough to do something that gives him a reason to make himself the victim. You've thought about this. Brandon's father has a lawyer on retainer and 2 city council connections, Maddie said. If this becomes a physical confrontation, they use it. If it stays legal and documented, they have nothing. She heard him processing that. You're smarter than I deserve, he said. I learned to think 3 steps ahead from somebody. He almost laughed. Not quite. All right. You call me when you need me. I'll be ready. I know you will. She hung up and stared at the folder on her table. Then she opened her laptop and found the video. It had been posted 3 hours earlier by someone named Kayla Sims. It already had 400 views. The comments were running in one direction, and it wasn't Brandon's. She watched it twice, listened to every word. Her own face surprised her. She looked steadier than she had felt, but Brandon's words were exactly as damaging as she'd calculated. Every syllable was clear, including the part that came after the serving tray went over, the part that she had been too focused on the cleanup to register in full. After Maddie went to her knees, while her colleague was helping gather envelopes Brandon had leaned toward Derek and said something that the microphone had half captured. 3 words, garbled slightly. But the lip readers in the comments had already gotten there before her. She's got nobody. 3 words said to his friend, while a woman kneeled on the ground, collecting donated money he had scattered. Maddie watched the video a third time. She had known from the moment he unfolded that photograph that this afternoon would not be the end of anything. It would be the beginning of something. She just hadn't known what shape it would take, or how quickly it would take that shape. She was finding out. By midnight, the video had 1,200 views. By the time Maddie's alarm went off at 6 in the morning, it had over 4,000, and 3 local Facebook groups were sharing it, and 2 people who had left comments were people she didn't recognize from Red Mesa at all. The footage had left the county. She showered, dressed, and drove to the diner. The Sunday morning shift at the Desert Rose was usually the quietest part of the week. Families coming in after church. Older regulars who treated the window booth like a personal office. The particular unhurried pace of a morning when nothing urgent was supposed to happen. Maddie had the coffee brewing, and the first tables set before the door opened. The first customer through the door was Carol Sims from the quilt booth, still wearing her Sunday dress. She walked directly to the counter, sat down, and folded her hands. "I heard the video spreading," she said. "It is," Maddie said. Carol nodded. "My daughter put it up. She asked me if that was okay. I told her yes." She paused. "I also called the event coordinator last night for the fundraiser committee to make a formal report about what happened at the booth." Maddie looked at her. "I've known the Mercers 20 years, Carol said. "I've watched that boy get away with half of what he shouldn't because nobody wanted to be the one to start a problem with Robert Mercer's family." She straightened her back. "I'm 71 years old. I have nothing to lose from a man who still thinks being rich is the same as being right. Carol, don't thank me. I didn't do it for you. I did it because what I saw yesterday was not right, and I am too old to pretend I didn't see it." She looked at the menu, which she'd had memorized for 15 years. "I'll have the usual." Maddie poured her coffee. The morning moved. More customers came. More people who had been at the square. More people who had seen the video. More people who had opinions they shared quietly with each other in booths and over coffee. The diner had always been a place where Red Mesa's actual conversations happened, not the public ones, not the polished ones, but the real ones. The ones where people said what they actually thought when they weren't worried about being overheard by the wrong person. What Maddie heard, in pieces and fragments and half-finished sentences over the next 3 hours, was that the town was deciding something. Not officially, not loudly, not yet. But the way a community makes its mind up about someone, the slow, collective withdrawal of benefit of the doubt was happening in the Desert Rose Grill on that Sunday morning. 1 cup of coffee at a time. She was in the back running inventory when Diane appeared in the doorway. "You need to come see something," Diane said. Her voice had a specific quality that made Maddie put down the clipboard immediately. She followed Diane to the small back office where the security monitor was the one that covered the front entrance, the parking area, and the side alley. Diane pulled up the footage from the previous afternoon, not from the fundraiser, but from the street side of the building. At 3:47 p.m., roughly 45 minutes after the incident at the booth, Brandon Mercer's black pickup had been parked across the street from the Desert Rose Grill. Just parked. The footage ran. The truck didn't move for 12 minutes. The angle wasn't clear enough to see whether he was on his phone or just sitting there. Then it drove away. Maddie stared at the timestamp. "He came back," she said. "He came and watched," Diane said. "We weren't open, so there was nothing to see. But he sat there for 12 minutes. Maddie said nothing for a moment. "That goes in the file," she said. "Already copied it." Maddie looked at her. Diane had the expression of a woman who had been building a case without being asked to, who had understood without being told that certain things needed to be preserved. "How long have you been keeping records?" Maddie asked. Diane met her eyes. "About 4 months longer than you think." That was the moment, not dramatic, not loud, when Maddie understood fully how many people had been watching. had known something was wrong, had waited for her to be ready to do something about it. She had spent 2 years worrying that accepting help meant losing herself. She had kept her father away and kept her struggles quiet and handled everything alone because she was terrified that the moment she let anyone behind the wall, her own story would stop being hers. What she had not understood was that the people who loved her had not been waiting to take over. They had been waiting to be useful. She walked back out to the front of the diner and worked the rest of the Sunday shift. Around 2 in the afternoon, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Is this Madison Cole?" A woman's voice. Steady, a little careful. "It is. My name is Amanda Pryor. I don't know if you know me. I was with Brandon Mercer about 2 years before you were. I saw the video." Maddie was very still. "I saw it," Amanda said. "And I recognized it. Not just him. The whole thing. The public part of it especially." A pause. "He did something similar to me. At a party. In front of people I knew." Maddie sat down on the stool behind the counter. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I am now. I've been okay for a while. But I wanted you to know that I have documentation. Things from when we were together. I kept them because I didn't know what else to do with them, and I wasn't brave enough to use them then." Another pause. "I think I might be brave enough now." After the call ended, Maddie held the phone in both hands for a long moment. Then she set it down on the counter carefully, the way you set something down when you're afraid of what will happen if you drop it. She hadn't asked Amanda to call. She hadn't known Amanda existed. She had not planned for a woman she'd never met to see a video online and pick up a phone. But this was how things happened when the truth was on your side. You built what you could build, and then other things came that you hadn't built that were drawn toward the truth by their own gravity. Maddie picked up her phone and texted her father. "Something new happened. I'll tell you tonight." 3 seconds later, "Call when you're ready." She put the phone in her apron pocket and picked up the coffee pot. But she was not the only one moving that Sunday. On the other side of Red Mesa, Brandon Mercer had woken up to 600 comments and 2 missed calls from his father. By noon, he had 17. By 2 in the afternoon, his father, Rob Mercer, had driven to his house personally, and they'd had the kind of conversation that left both men angrier when it was done than when it started. Robert wanted Brandon to apologize publicly, carefully, with specific language Robert's attorney had already drafted. Brandon refused. "She's nobody," Brandon said. "She works at a diner." "Dad, you really want me to issue a public apology to a diner girl?" "I want you to stop the bleeding," Robert said. "That video is moving, and it's not moving in your direction. It'll die down." "You knocked over donated money at a charity event." "Brandon, you knocked a serving tray out of a woman's hands, in front of witnesses, on camera." Robert's voice was controlled in the way of men who have spent decades keeping control. "This is not something that dies down. She's been telling people I treated her badly. This is her doing. You handed her the ammunition while 300 people watched." Robert looked at his son. "I'm asking you to be smart about this. She doesn't have anyone backing her up. Her family I've been asking for 2 years, and she has never once introduced me to a single family member. She doesn't have anyone." Robert was quiet for a moment. "I hope you're right," he said. "Because if you're wrong, the apology becomes 10 times harder to walk back from." Brandon was right about one thing. Maddie hadn't introduced him to her family. What he didn't know, what he had never thought to investigate, because in his mental model, Maddie's family was either poor or absent, or both, was that a man named Tommy Dalton, who went by Graves, had received the photograph of Maddie on the town square pavement at 1:24 a.m. on Sunday morning, forwarded without comment from a prospect who'd seen it online. Graves had looked at it for a long time. Then he'd sent it to exactly one contact in his phone. The contact was listed under a single name, Razor. Razor had not slept that night. He'd sat with the photograph and made 2 phone calls and said very little on either one. Then he'd waited for his daughter to text him. She had. And he had started making plans that had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with presence, that the kind of presence that didn't need to threaten anything, because the weight of it said everything on its own. Maddie closed the diner that Sunday evening, locked the front door, and sat at the counter for a few minutes alone in the quiet. The manila folder in her bag was thicker than it had been 24 hours ago. Diane's security footage, Carol's formal complaint, Amanda's phone number, and the promise of documents that Maddie didn't have yet. Officer Reyes's word that he remembered exactly what he had witnessed. And a father 70 miles away who had been waiting for her to say the word. She pulled out her phone. She typed, "I'm ready, Dad. Come tomorrow." The reply came in under 10 seconds. "Already on my way." Maddie stared at those 4 words for a long moment. Then she turned off the diner lights, walked out the front door, and drove home through the dark streets of Red Mesa. Somewhere on the highway between Phoenix and Red Mesa, a convoy was already forming, not racing, not angry, just moving. The way water moves when you open the gate, steady and certain and impossible to stop once it started. Brandon Mercer had told half of Red Mesa that Maddie Cole had nobody. She had decided it was time to introduce him to everybody. Maddie heard them before she saw them. She was behind the counter Monday morning, working the 10 o'clock lull between the breakfast rush and the lunch crowd, refilling the salt shakers the way she did every Monday out of habit and routine, when one of the regulars, old Frank Dibble, who'd been coming in every weekday for 11 years and sitting at the same stool since before Maddie started working there, lifted his head from his newspaper and tilted it slightly toward the window. "You hearing that?" he said. Maddie heard it, distant at first. The kind of sound that registers in your chest before your ears fully process it, a low, rolling vibration coming from somewhere down the road, still far enough away that it could have been a truck or a construction rig or nothing at all. But Maddie knew the difference. She had grown up with that sound. She knew the specific frequency of multiple engines running in formation. The way the rhythm layered when bikes moved together at road speed, not racing, not revving, just rolling forward with the easy, unhurried certainty of something that had already decided where it was going. She set down the salt shaker. Frank looked at her over his reading glasses. "Friends of yours?" "Family," she said. She walked around the counter and stood near the front window. 3 of the other customers had already turned in their seats. Jess came out of the back with a tray and stopped when she heard it. Diane appeared from the office doorway and stood very still with her arms crossed. The first motorcycle came into view at the end of the main block. Then the second. Then, in the way that a single line of text becomes a paragraph, they kept coming one after another, filling the street with the kind of presence that didn't announce itself loudly because it didn't have to. These were not young men looking for attention. These were riders who had been on the road long enough that the road itself recognized them. Leather vests, gray beards on some, dark beards on others. One completely clean-shaved man who looked like he could have been anyone's uncle until you saw his eyes. Every one of them unhurried. Every one of them knowing exactly where they were stopping. At the front rode Raymond Cole. He pulled up first, cut the engine, sat on the bike for exactly 1 second the way experienced riders do when they arrive somewhere not dramatic, just a beat of stillness before movement, and then swung off with the kind of ease that doesn't come from youth. It comes from years. He was broad across the shoulders in the way of men who were built for work, not for show. Gray beard, weathered face, a black leather vest over a dark shirt, patches that meant things to people who understood them and meant nothing to people who didn't. His hands, when he pulled off his riding gloves, were large and scarred in the minor ways that hands get scarred over decades of mechanical work. He did not look around the street for threats. He did not look toward the Desert Rose Grill like a man arriving for a confrontation. He looked at the front door of the restaurant, and his entire face did something that none of the people watching from the street or the window would have predicted from the way he looked on that motorcycle. It softened. Maddie pushed through the front door. She walked straight across the sidewalk toward him, without slowing down. And Razor Cole opened his arms, and she walked directly into them. And he held her the way fathers hold daughters when they haven't seen them long enough. And something happened that reminded them both That time is not something you get back. Hey, Dad, she said against his shoulder. Hey, baby. His voice, heard up close, was low and unhurried. The voice of a man who had learned decades ago that volume was not the same as authority. They stood there for exactly as long as they needed to, not performing it, not aware of the audience. Just two people who loved each other, standing on a sidewalk on a Monday morning in Red Mesa, Arizona. Then Razor stepped back, held her at arm's length, and looked at her the way parents look when they're checking for damage and trying not to show that's what they're doing. You look tired, he said. I look fine, she said. You look tired and fine. Both can be true. He looked at her face for another second. Nobody touched you. Nobody touched me. He nodded once. That was the thing you needed to know first. And now he knew it, and he could move forward. Brandon Mercer had been across the street. He had been coming out of his father's real estate office, the one with the Mercer Property Group sign in the window. The one his father's name was on, in gold letters when the motorcycles turned onto the block. He had stopped on the sidewalk with his hand still on the door and watched them come. His first instinct, the one he always trusted, was that this had nothing to do with him. Motorcycles passed through Red Mesa. Riders stopped for gas and food. It was a highway town, and that was a normal thing, and he was not going to stand on the sidewalk reacting to motorcycles like a person who had something to be nervous about. Then they stopped in front of the Desert Rose, and Maddie came out. Brandon watched it happen. The woman he had spent 2 years with, the woman he had told an entire crowd had nobody, whose family he had spent 2 years mocking for their absence, walked directly into the arms of a man who rode at the front of a Hells Angels convoy and called him Dad, and the man held her like she was the most important thing within 50 miles of where he was standing. Brandon's hand was still on the door handle. He couldn't move. Derek was behind him. Derek had been in the office for a meeting about a property deal, and he stepped out onto the sidewalk and saw what Brandon was seeing and went completely quiet. Is that Derek started? Don't, Brandon said. Brandon, that vest says. I said don't. But the information was already in the air between them, unignorable. Brandon had spent 2 years filling in the blank of Maddie's mysterious father with every assumption that flattered his own superiority poor, absent, irrelevant, embarrassing. He had made jokes at dinner parties to his friends. He had used the mystery as evidence of her smallness, her lack of background, her fundamental nobodiness. And she had let him. That was the part that arrived last and hit hardest. She had let him believe it. She had never corrected him. She had sat across from him at dinners and listened to him invent a story about her absent, useless, probably in prison father, and she had said nothing except my family is my business, and she had let him talk because she had known on some level that he would talk, that he would reveal himself in the talking, that given enough space to construct his own version of her life, he would build something that showed exactly who he was. And he had built it publicly at a charity fundraiser in front of 300 people and at least 3 cameras. He was still standing on the sidewalk when Razor Cole looked across the street. Not at Brandon specifically, just at the street, the way you look when you arrive somewhere and take in the environment. But the look landed on Brandon for 1 second, and 1 second was enough, and Brandon took a step back toward the door. Inside the Desert Rose, Razor sat at the counter. He didn't take a booth. He didn't sit with his back to the room. He sat at the counter the way he always sat when he visited, the way he had sat every time he came to see Maddie in the 3 years she'd worked here, on the occasions when he'd made the drive without making a production of it. Just a father visiting his daughter at work. Maddie poured him coffee without asking, because she already knew. He looked at the coffee. How is it? He asked. Terrible, she said. He took a drink. Yeah. He set the mug down. Still better than what we make at the house. Tommy Dalton Graves had come in behind him and taken a stool 2 seats down, and a man named Eddie Birch, who everyone called Preacher, for reasons no one fully explained, had taken the seat at the end. The other riders were outside, not blocking anything, not doing anything confrontational, just present in the specific way that their presence created a perimeter without any of them having to say a word about it. Diane came around the counter and looked at Razor Cole for a long moment. Diane Keller, Maddie said. My father. Diane looked at him. He looked at her. She works hard, Diane said. I know she does, Razor said. She never asked for anything extra. Not once in 3 years. That doesn't surprise me either. Diane nodded, satisfied in the way of women who ask the questions they mean to ask without appearing to ask them. Coffee's on the house. Food too, if you want it. I appreciate that, Razor said. Diane went back to the kitchen. Maddie leaned on the counter across from her father and lowered her voice. Brandon was across the street when you pulled up. Razor didn't look toward the window. I know, he saw. Good. He turned the coffee mug a quarter turn. Tell me about the documentation. Maddie reached under the counter and pulled out the manila folder she had brought from home that morning. She set it in front of him, and he opened it and began reading. Not quickly, deliberately. The way he read everything, with the patience of a man who had learned that moving fast through information was how you missed the thing that mattered. He read for 7 minutes without saying anything. Maddie refilled his coffee. He closed the folder. Amanda Pryor, he said. She called me yesterday. She was with him before me. Recognized the pattern. And she has documentation. She says she does. I believe her, Razor nodded. Officer Reyes witnessed the whole thing. He told me he'd remember exactly what he saw. Is he honest? Maddie considered the question seriously, the way her father always expected serious questions to be considered. I think he's the kind of honest that costs him something sometimes. Yeah, those are the useful ones. Razor looked at the folder again. The security footage from here. Diane pulled it. Brandon parked across the street for 12 minutes after the fundraiser and just sat there. Something moved across Razor's face, controlled, deliberate, put back where it came from, before it could become anything actionable. 12 minutes. She copied it. Good. He looked at his daughter. You've built this carefully. I wasn't building it for this, she said. I was just being careful, the way you taught me to be careful. Keep records. Know what you own. Know what you agreed to. Don't let anyone rewrite history on you. Razor was quiet for a moment. I taught you that because of business, he said. Turns out it applies everywhere. He almost smiled. It landed around his eyes before his mouth caught up with it. The bell above the door opened. Everyone in the diner registered it. The riders on the outside registered it. That was the particular quality of the morning. Everything was noticed. Everything was registered in the way of an environment that had elevated its own awareness without announcing the elevation. Officer Daniel Reyes walked in. He was in uniform. Off-duty, Maddie could tell by the way he moved, not responding to a call, not on patrol, but present with intention. He looked at the counter, looked at Razor, looked at Graves and Preacher, and did not change his expression. He walked to the counter and sat down 2 stools from Razor. Maddie poured him coffee. He looked at it. Then he looked at Razor. Raymond Cole, he said. Razor looked at him. Officer. I'm not here in any official capacity this morning, Reyes said. I'm here because I was standing 30 feet away from what happened Saturday, and I watched the whole thing, and I want Maddie to know I'm available to give a formal statement whenever she decides to pursue this. The diner was very quiet. Razor looked at his daughter. Maddie said, Thank you. Daniel. Reyes picked up his coffee cup. I've been in this town 8 years. I know the Mercer name. I know what it does to complaints that get filed. He set the cup down. I also know that complaints filed by a credible witness with documentation look different than complaints filed without one. He glanced at the manila folder on the counter. That what I think it is? It's a start, Maddie said. Reyes nodded slowly. Then let's make sure it finishes. What none of them knew what was happening 3 blocks away while Razor sat at the counter and Reyes drank his coffee was that Robert Mercer had finally gotten through to Brandon on the phone, and the conversation was not going the way Robert had hoped. You need to go over there, Robert said. Today. Now. Before this gets worse. And do what? Brandon's voice was tight. Walk in there with those people sitting in the diner. Did you see how many of them there are? I don't care how many of them there are. You go, you apologize to Maddie directly, and you do it before a lawyer has to get involved. Dad, Those are Hell's Angels. You want me to walk into a diner full of the sitting at a counter drinking coffee? Brandon, they're not doing anything. If you go in there and apologize like an adult, they can't touch you. If you don't, this video keeps spreading and I start losing partners. Robert's voice dropped to something precise and cold. I've already had one call this morning. One of the event sponsors from the fundraiser committee. They're asking questions I don't want to answer. Brandon was quiet. Go, Robert said. Brandon went. He crossed the street with his jaw set and his hands in his pockets, and the expression of a man who had decided that whatever was about to happen was beneath him but unavoidable. He pushed through the door of the Desert Rose, and the bell rang, and everybody looked up, and Brandon Mercer stood in the entrance of the diner for one full second, registering the room. Razor Cole at the counter. Two of his riders flanking him at a distance. Officer Reyes in uniform 2 stools down. Diane visible through the kitchen pass-through window. Jess and 2 other staff members who had materialized without urgency to positions that covered most of the room. And Maddie behind the counter, looking at him with an expression that was not angry, not triumphant, not afraid, just watching, waiting. Brandon took 2 steps toward the counter. Behind him, he heard movement from outside, not threatening. Just the sound of the riders who had been standing near the bikes registering that the door had opened and adjusting their attention accordingly. He did not turn around. Turning around would have felt like flinching. Maddie, he said. His voice was controlled. I'd like to talk to you. Okay, she said. He looked at the men at the counter. Privately? No, she said. The single word was quiet and complete. Brandon's jaw tightened. He looked at Razor, who was looking at his coffee mug and not at Brandon, which was somehow more uncomfortable than being looked at directly. Maddie, I came to apologize. I can hear you fine from here, she said. His eyes moved to Reyes. The uniform registered. His calculation was visible for exactly 1 second, the rapid assessment of a man deciding whether the presence of law enforcement made this better or worse for him. It made it worse. He looked back at Maddie. What I did at the fundraiser was, he stopped. Started again. It wasn't how I wanted things to go. That's not an apology, Maddie said. I'm getting there. Take your time, she said, and refilled a customer's coffee without looking away from him. Brandon's hands came out of his pockets. I'm sorry. For what happened at the booth. For the things I said. It was another stop. The word he needed was clearly somewhere he didn't want to go. It was wrong. The diner was completely silent. Not the silence of people ignoring something. The silence of people listening to every syllable. Maddie set the coffee pot down. She looked at Brandon for a long moment. Not with cruelty. Not with satisfaction. With the particular clarity of someone who has had a long time to understand a specific person completely and no longer needs anything from them. Brandon, she said, I want to ask you something. He waited. Are you sorry for what you did? Or are you sorry that everyone saw it? The silence stretched. His jaw moved. That's not fair. It's the only question, she said. He couldn't answer it. She watched him try and fail to find a version of the truth that served him. And when he couldn't, she saw the moment when the apology she had already known was confirmed himself as hollow. And she was not surprised, and she was not particularly sad about it, because she had stopped needing anything from Brandon Mercer 6 weeks ago. Razor had not turned around through any of this. He had not looked at Brandon. He had not moved. He was simply present, a weight in the room that said everything without saying anything. Then one of the younger riders came through the door. He was maybe 25, with the energy of someone who hadn't yet learned how to channel anger into stillness, and he had clearly seen Brandon's car outside and made a decision with his feet before his head finished the thought. He got 3 steps inside and said, That's him. It wasn't directed at anyone specific, but the temperature in the room changed instantly. Razor turned, not fast, not dramatic, just turned on the stool and looked at the younger man with an expression that had more authority in it than anything he could have said with volume. Rico, he said, one word. The young rider stopped. Step outside, Razor said. Boss, this guy, I said step outside. A beat. Then Rico stepped back through the door. Razor turned back to his coffee. He looked at Brandon for the first time. Brandon, who had been around powerful men his entire life, men who wore power in their titles and their offices and their tailored clothes, stood in a diner looking at a gray-bearded biker in a leather vest and understood, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, what it looked like when authority had nothing to prove. Razor did not threaten him. He did not stand up. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at Brandon Mercer and said, "My daughter has something to say to you." And then he turned back to his coffee and was done with Brandon completely, which was worse than any threat because it said clearly and finally that Brandon was not the one in this room worth paying attention to. Maddie reached under the counter and placed a document on the surface. One page. She slid it across the counter toward Brandon. He looked at it. "This is a formal notification," she said, "that I intend to file a report with the Red Mesa Police Department documenting the incident at the community fundraiser on Saturday, the pattern of harassment that preceded it, and the threatening messages sent to me in the weeks following our breakup." She kept her voice level and clear, the way she spoke when she was managing something important at work. "I also have a formal complaint already filed with the fundraiser committee. And I've been contacted by a woman who has documentation of a similar pattern during her relationship with you." Brandon's face changed. Not all at once. In pieces. The way a building settles. "Amanda," he started. "Her name isn't relevant to this conversation," Maddie said. He stared at the document. Then at Maddie. Then involuntarily, at Razor's back. "You planned this," he said. His voice had a different texture now. Not the polished public tone. Not the controlled apology register. The actual voice underneath. The one that came out when he felt cornered. "You planned all of this. The whole thing." "I kept records," Maddie said. "I documented things that happened to me. I kept evidence of what you sent me and what you threatened and what you did. That's not a plan. That's just not letting anyone take my history away from me. You used your father." "I called my father," she said. "The same way anyone calls their family when they need them. The difference is you assumed I didn't have one worth calling." Brandon picked up the document. His hands were not completely steady. Reyes had not moved from his stool. He had both hands around his coffee cup and he was watching everything with the neutral, recording attention of a man who understood that this moment would matter later. "I came here to apologize," Brandon said, but the sentence had deflated somewhere between the beginning and the end of it. "I heard you," Maddie said, "and I want you to understand something." She leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, just direct, the way she leaned across the counter when she wanted to make sure a customer heard her clearly. "You wanted everyone to see who I was. You brought a crowd and a photograph and 2 years of condescension, and you stood in front of people and told them I was nobody. And all you did, the only thing you actually accomplished, was show them who you are." The words landed in the silence. Brandon did not respond. There was nothing to respond with. He had arrived at the Desert Rose Grill with his father's drafted language and his own remaining pride, and a dim hope that the presence of Maddie's father would give him something to point to some threat, some intimidation, something he could use to reframe himself as the reasonable man in an unreasonable situation. Instead, he had found a woman with a folder full of documentation, a police officer drinking coffee in uniform, a biker boss who couldn't be bothered to raise his voice, and an audience of regular customers who had known Maddie Cole for years and had made their choice about who to believe before he ever walked through the door. He picked up the paper. He walked out. The bell rang. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Frank Dibble, from his stool at the end of the counter, turned a page of his newspaper and said, "More coffee when you get a chance, Maddie." And Maddie picked up the pot and went to pour it, and that small, ordinary act, the resumption of the regular world, after a moment that had bent the air, was somehow the most powerful thing she did all morning. Razor watched her. Then he said quietly, to the coffee mug in front of him, "She's going to be all right." Diane, who had appeared at the edge of the kitchen doorway without anyone quite noticing, said, "She's been all right. She's going to be even better." Outside, Brandon sat in his car. He looked at the document in his hand. He looked at the front of the Desert Rose Grill. He had come to Red Mesa's Main Street expecting to find a woman who was grateful for the apology and a father who was a threat he could neutralize or discredit. He had found neither. He had found something he didn't have a framework for a woman who had prepared for this moment, not out of revenge, but out of the deep, practical habit of someone who had always known that the truth needed to be protected because not one would tell it if you didn't. He pulled out his phone and called his father. It didn't work, he said. Robert was quiet for a moment. What did she say? She has documentation. A police officer was there. She said she's filing a formal report. Another quiet stretch. And her father was sitting at the counter. Robert exhaled, long and slow. Brandon. Who is her father? Brandon stared through the windshield. I don't know, he said. I never asked. And that was the specific, damning thing that he had been too certain of himself to do. He had spent 2 years assuming he already knew, and the assumption had cost him everything it was possible to lose in a morning. Inside the diner, Maddie was back behind the counter. The Monday lunch crowd was beginning to drift in. Regular people, familiar faces, the ordinary machinery of a day that was going to keep moving, regardless of what had just happened in it, because days do that, they keep moving. And it is up to you whether you move with them or stay standing in the wreckage of a moment that already passed. Razor finished his coffee. He set the mug down. You need anything else from me today? He asked. Maddie thought about it. No, you can go. He looked at her. I don't have to. I know you don't. She met his eyes. That's exactly why I can say yes. He stood, reached across the counter and put one large hand briefly on top of hers. Call me when the report is filed, he said. I will. He put on his riding gloves. He walked toward the door. Then he stopped and turned back. Hey, the coffee really is terrible. I know, she said. It's always been terrible. He almost smiled. And then he was gone. Through the door and into the Monday morning. Back to the bikes parked along the curb. Back to the men who had ridden 70 miles at his word. Because that was what you did when family needed a visible reminder that she was not alone. Maddie watched the motorcycles leave from the window. She watched until the sound faded. Then she picked up the coffee pot and went back to work. What she didn't know yet what was building in the hours between that Monday morning and the days that would follow was that the morning had been recorded too. Not by anyone who planned it. Just by a man eating breakfast at the window table. Phone face up on the table, screen on, recording the ambient moment in the way people sometimes record things without quite meaning to turn it into anything. He'd gotten Razor's back, Maddie's face, Brandon walking in, Brandon walking out, the document being slid across the counter. The moment with Rico at the door and Razor's single word that stopped the young man cold. He posted it that afternoon without commentary. Just the video. Just what happened. By nightfall, it had 30,000 views, and Brandon Mercer's Monday was about to get considerably longer. 30,000 views became 80,000 by Tuesday morning. Maddie found out the way she found out most things that week, not by checking herself, but because someone else checked and came to tell her. This time it was Jess, who came in 15 minutes early for her shift and stood at the counter with her phone screen facing outward and an expression that was somewhere between amazed and vindicated. 83,000, Jess said. As of 20 minutes ago, Maddie looked at the number. Then she looked at the thumbnail, a frozen frame from the second video. The one shot from the window table, catching her face in profile as she slid the document across the counter toward Brandon. She looked calm in it. She looked like someone who had been waiting a long time to say exactly what she said. She handed the phone back to Jess. Okay, she said. Let's get the coffee started. That's all you have to say? What else would I say? Jess stared at her for a moment. You're either the coolest person I've ever met, or you're completely terrifying. Probably both, Maddie said, and went to start the coffee. But the number mattered, and she knew it mattered, and the reason it mattered had nothing to do with validation, and everything to do with what visibility did to accountability. The first video had stayed mostly local Red Mesa. Surrounding counties, people who knew the town and the fundraiser and the Mercer name. The second video had left the region entirely. She could tell by the comment section, which Diane had printed out in its entirety on 6 pages of paper and left on Maddie's desk that morning with a post-it note that said simply, "Read these." Maddie read them at her break. Most of them were from women she had never heard of, in cities she had never visited, who had watched a 60-second clip of a man being told that humiliating someone publicly only reveals the humiliator, and had felt something shift in their chest. Some of them said so plainly. Some of them just wrote a single word, yes, and somehow that single word, repeated across hundreds of comments from hundreds of strangers, carried more weight than a paragraph would have. Some of them told their own stories in the comments. 3 sentences, 5 sentences, a whole paragraph. Different men, different situations, different towns, same architecture, the same confidence, the same public stage, the same expectation that a woman would collapse when properly humiliated. Maddie folded the pages and put them in the manila folder. The folder was getting thick. That Tuesday, Robert Mercer's attorney called the Red Mesa Police Department and spoke to the duty sergeant about the nature of the complaint that had been filed. The sergeant, a 15-year veteran named Hollis, who had no particular feelings about the Mercer family either way, but had very particular feelings about attorneys calling before a formal interview had even been scheduled, told the attorney that the complaint was being processed according to standard procedure and that he was welcome to put any concerns in writing. The attorney did not put anything in writing. That same Tuesday afternoon, the first of the event sponsors called the fundraiser committee, not to ask questions, this time to withdraw. A family-owned furniture chain that had sponsored the Red Mesa Community fundraiser for 6 consecutive years sent a 1-paragraph email that cited a conflict with their organizational values and wished the committee well going forward. The committee chair forwarded the email to 3 other board members, who forwarded it to 3 more. And by end of business, the news had reached Robert Mercer through a board member, who was also his Tuesday afternoon golf partner. Robert called Brandon at 5:15. Brandon was at the gym. He let it go to voicemail. Then he listened to the message, which was 15 seconds long and contained the words Hartwell Furniture, and withdrew and call me immediately. In that order. And he called back. "It's one sponsor," Brandon said. "It was 6 years of partnership," Robert said. "And it's not one. I got a call from the Hendersons 20 minutes ago. They're taking their name off the fall gala." Brandon sat down on a bench. "Dad, I told you," Robert said. The 3 words landed with the flatness of a man who had said something important that was not listened to, and who was taking no satisfaction from being right. "I told you to apologize before it grew. I told you it would grow. She has a lawyer involved? Is that what this is?" "She doesn't need a lawyer," Robert said. "She has a video with 80,000 views. She has a police report. She has documentation that our attorney has not seen and cannot evaluate because you didn't think it was worth mentioning that she kept records." A pause. "What records, Brandon? What exactly does she have?" The silence on Brandon's end lasted long enough to tell Robert everything he needed to know about what those records might contain. "Get home," Robert said. "We're talking tonight." Brandon drove home. He sat in his driveway for 6 minutes before going inside. In those 6 minutes, he went through the inventory of his own behavior in the way that men who have never had to account for their behavior go through it when accounting becomes unavoidable, not comprehensively, not honestly, but tactically, the way you search a room for a specific object you're afraid of finding. He went through the text messages he'd sent in the weeks after the breakup. He went through the voicemails. He went through the night he had called Maddie's workplace from a blocked number and said something to the person who answered that he had never fully formed in his mind as a threat, but that he knew sitting in the driveway now would read as one on paper. He went inside. Across town, Maddie had just finished her shift and was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her phone when Amanda Pryor called for the second time. "I've been talking to someone," Amanda said, "a legal advocate, just to understand my options. She said the documentation I have is she said it's relevant to what you're doing." "What kind of documentation?" Maddie asked. "Messages. Mostly messages. And a record I kept, I know how that sounds. But I kept a journal for about 3 months when we were together because I couldn't trust my own memory anymore. He would say things and then say he didn't say them, do things, and then act like they hadn't happened. So I started writing things down. Maddie was very still. Amanda, she said carefully, I know exactly what you mean. There's one specific incident, Amanda said, at a work function of his. A pause. It was similar to the fundraiser. Public, deliberate, in front of people who knew his family. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness had effort in it. I didn't do anything about it. I was so sure nobody would believe me over him. I believe you, Maddie said. I know. That's why I'm calling. A breath. I want to add my documentation to yours. Not as the main thing, as a pattern. My advocate said a pattern is what makes isolated incidents into something that can't be explained away. Maddie wrote down the advocate's name and number. She added it to the folder. Then she called Officer Reyes. He picked up on the second ring. Maddie, I have an additional witness, she said. A prior relationship. She kept records. A pause. How comprehensive are the records? A journal. 3 months. Plus messages. Another pause. That's significant. She could hear him thinking on the other end. Can she come in? I'll ask her. Tell her to bring everything. Maddie hung up and called Amanda back. The conversation was short and direct, and when it was done, Amanda said she would come to Red Mesa that Thursday, and Maddie said she would arrange for them to meet Reyes together. And Amanda said thank you in a voice that sounded like someone who had been holding something heavy for 2 years and could finally feel the weight starting to move. The next morning was Wednesday, and Wednesday was when the first former employee spoke publicly. His name was Marcus Webb. He had worked at Mercer Property Group for 14 months before being let go 18 months ago. He'd signed a standard separation agreement with an NDA clause, or what he'd been told was an NNDA clause, but his attorney had reviewed it the previous night at Marcus's request and found that the clause was narrower than Marcus had believed and did not, in fact, prohibit him from describing his direct experience of his working environment. Marcus posted a statement on his personal social media, 8 paragraphs, specific, dated, written in the careful tone of a man who had practiced restraint for a long time and was now deploying it with precision. He described 3 incidents of public humiliation, not toward him specifically, but witnessed toward other employees. He described the pattern. He described how complaints had been handled, which was to say, not handled. He tagged the fundraiser committee. He tagged the local news. He did not tag Maddie. He didn't need to. The connection was already visible to everyone following the story, which, at this point, included 2 reporters from the county news outlet and 1 from a Phoenix-based digital publication that covered human interest stories across the state. By noon on Wednesday, the Phoenix reporter had called the Desert Rose. Diane answered. She listened to the request for a comment from Maddie. She said, Miss Cole is working. She'll return calls in order of relevance. She hung up. She came to the back and told Maddie. Maddie thought about it for 30 seconds. What's the publication? Diane told her. I'll call them back this afternoon, Maddie said. But I want to check with Reyes first. I don't want to say anything that affects the formal process. Smart, Diane said. Also, you have a visitor. Maddie looked up. Standing at the front of the diner, having just come through the door with no apparent awareness that she should have called ahead, was a woman Maddie recognized immediately. Carol Sims. Church quilt booth Carol, who had filed the formal fundraiser complaint and ordered her usual, and said she'd done it for herself, not for Maddie. But Carol had not come alone. She had brought 4 women. All of them were over 50. All of them were the kind of women Red Mesa had in abundance, women who had been in this town long enough to have watched everything happen once already and had opinions about all of it. They found a large booth near the window and arranged themselves with the decisive efficiency of a committee that had already met somewhere else. Maddie came to the table. Carol looked up. We're the fundraiser review board, she said. Unofficial. We're not the actual committee. But we are the people on the actual committee who do all the actual work. So the distinction is largely theoretical. Okay, Maddie said. We want you to know that 3 sponsors have withdrawn this week. We also want you to know that we believe, as a body, that the responsibility for those withdrawals rests with the person who created the situation that produced the videos that prompted those withdrawals. We do not hold you accountable. I appreciate that. We also, Carol continued, want to offer the fundraiser's formal letter of support to accompany any legal complaint you file, stating what happened at the booth, confirming it occurred on fundraiser grounds, and noting that the funds scattered on the pavement were funds donated by community members to vulnerable families. Maddie looked at the 5 women. That would be helpful, she said. We thought so. Carol folded her hands. We would also like 5 pieces of pie, assorted. Maddie almost smiled. I'll get those started. She walked back to the counter and leaned on it for a moment, with her hands flat on the surface, and let herself feel just for a second, not long, not publicly, what it was to stand in the middle of a room full of people who were choosing to be useful to the truth without being asked to, without being organized, without being led by anyone except their own clear sense of what was right. Then she straightened up and went to cut the pie. Thursday arrived, and with it Amanda Pryor, who drove 3 hours from Tucson in a sensible gray sedan and sat across from Maddie in a corner booth of the Desert Rose for 45 minutes before they went together to the police station to meet Officer Reyes. Amanda was 33 years old, with dark hair and a direct way of speaking that reminded Maddie of women who had spent significant time being doubted and had responded by becoming precise. She brought a binder, tabbed sections, printed copies of messages organized by date, journal entries in a composition notebook with sticky notes flagging the specific incidents. Maddie looked at the binder. You kept it organized, she said. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, Amanda said, but I knew I needed to have it. I couldn't let him tell me my own story. The 2 women looked at each other across the table with the particular recognition of people who have survived the same specific weather system. Did he ever tell you that you had nobody? Maddie asked. Amanda let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. He told me my friends didn't really care about me, that I'd be lost without his connections, that my job was cute. She looked at her hands. He said the word cute about everything I'd built for myself. He told me I was just a diner girl nobody would notice, Maddie said. Amanda looked up. And you were daughter, Maddie said simply. Amanda stared at her for 1 full second. Then she said, oh my God. He didn't know, Maddie said. How did he not know? Because he never asked. He assumed. Amanda shook her head slowly. He assumed you were nobody because you weren't performing the right signals. Because you didn't talk about your family like it was something that would impress him. She paused. Because people like Brandon only recognize power when it looks like the kind of power they already have. Maddie nodded. He spent 2 years waiting for me to need something from him. And you never did. And I never did. The meeting with Reyes that afternoon lasted 2 hours. Amanda presented her documentation. Reyes asked careful, specific questions without editorializing. A second officer came in partway through to take notes. The room had the focused, paper-smelling quality of an official process in motion, the specific atmosphere that Maddie had been trying to create for weeks, the environment in which the truth had a structure to live inside. When it was done, Reyes walked them out. In the parking lot, he stopped and looked at Maddie. This is a complete package, he said. The original incident, documented by witnesses. Your records of the preceding harassment. The security footage from the restaurant. Miss Pryor's records establishing a behavioral pattern. He paused. I want you to be prepared for the Mercer family's attorney to challenge everything he can. I'm prepared, Maddie said. It may take time. I've got time. He looked at her for a moment. You know, when you said to remember what I saw that first day at the fundraiser, I didn't fully understand what you were building yet. I didn't either, she said honestly. I just knew the truth needed witnesses. Reyes nodded slowly. It has them. What Maddie did not know as she drove home that Thursday evening was that Brandon Mercer had made his second catastrophic miscalculation of the week. He had called Amanda Pryor. He had gotten her number from somewhere, not from Maddie, who hadn't given it, but from somewhere in the thin network of connections that linked a town like Red Mesa to a city like Tucson. He called her Wednesday night. He told her he'd heard she'd been talking to Maddie. He told her he was sorry for anything that had happened between them that she'd found upsetting. And then he said, in the specific tone of a man who thinks he is being reasonable, that he hoped she would consider the full context of their relationship before making any decisions that could hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt. Amanda had listened to the entire call. She had also recorded it. Arizona was a one-party consent state. She had looked that up before she called him back. She brought the recording to the police station the following morning, 48 hours ahead of schedule. Reyes listened to it at his desk with his hands folded and his face completely still. Then he made a phone call. Then he wrote something on a notepad. Then he called Maddie. Two things, he said. First, Amanda Pryor has provided a recorded conversation that may constitute witness tampering. Second, I've been authorized to move forward with formal charges. A pause. This is moving faster than these things usually move. Maddie sat down on the edge of her bed. Why? She asked. Because your documentation is airtight, he said. And because Brandon Mercer just called your witness and asked her to reconsider her testimony. And because the sergeant decided this morning that when someone calls a documented witness and suggests they think carefully before saying what they know, that's not a gray area. Maddie was quiet. Maddie, Reyes said, "Are you okay?" "Yes," she said. "I'm okay." She looked across the room at the manila folder on her desk, now thick with weeks of careful work. "I just need a minute. Take your time." She sat with the phone in her hand. She thought about the Saturday afternoon 2 weeks ago when she had knelt on the pavement of the town square gathering envelopes because she refused to let donated money blow away in the wind. She thought about how she had stood back up. She thought about the folder, the months of records, the screenshots and receipts and printed messages that she had kept not as weapons but as protection. The way you keep important documents in a fireproof box, not because you plan to use them, but because you understand the truth needs a safe place to live. She thought about her father. She picked up the phone and called him. He answered the first ring. "They're filing formal charges," she said. A long pause. "You built that," he said. "I had help. You built the foundation," he said. "Everything else had something to stand on because of what you did." Another pause. "I want you to know something." "What?" "I've been doing what I do for 30 years, Razor said. "I've been in rooms with dangerous people, and I've had to make decisions about when to act and when to wait and how to tell the difference. And I have never," he stopped, started again. "I have never been more impressed by anyone's decision-making than I was by yours in the last 2 weeks." Maddie pressed the heel of her hand against her eye. "You're gonna make me cry, Dad. I know, but it's true." His voice was steady. "I came because you called me, but you had already won before I got there. I just stood in the room so nobody would think about doing something stupid." She almost laughed. "That's actually a pretty accurate description of what happened." "I have my uses," he said. "You have more than that," she said quietly. They stayed on the line for a moment without speaking. The way people stay on the line when the important thing has been said and what comes after just the comfort of not hanging up yet. Then Razor said, "How's the diner?" "Good busy, Diane." "Still terrifying." "Still wonderful." "Good woman," he said. "The best," Maddie agreed. After they hung up, Maddie sat for a while longer. The evening was quiet. Through the window she could hear the ordinary sounds of her neighborhood, someone's sprinkler, a car going past, the distant bark of a dog. The kind of sounds that meant the world was continuing in its regular way while significant things happened inside it. She thought about Brandon sitting in his car in her driveway. She thought about Robert Mercer's voice on that phone call, the one Brandon described to her later, the one that had driven him to the diner, and the thing Robert had said that Brandon hadn't fully understood the weight of. "I hope you're right. Because if you're wrong, the apology becomes 10 times harder to walk back from." Robert had understood before Brandon did that influence is only a resource when everyone in the room agrees to honor it. The moment people stopped agreeing, the moment Carol Sims filed her complaint, and Marcus Webb posted his statement, and Amanda Pryor drove 3 hours from Tucson with a binder of tabbed documentation, the currency became worthless. Because currency is only worth something when you can spend it, and Brandon had walked into every room trying to spend something that the people in the room had already stopped accepting. He had never understood that reputation isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn and then re-earn every single day, in every single room, in front of every single person who is watching. Maddie had understood that since she was 18 years old. She had understood it in the specific way that people understand things when they grow up around power and see what it looks like when it's used well and what it looks like when it corrodes. Her father was feared. Her father was also, in every meaningful way, trusted. The people who rode with Razor Cole did so because they chose to, because he had earned their trust by being consistent and honest and disciplined over decades. He had never confused intimidation with respect. He had never confused fear with loyalty. He had made 1,000 decisions she would never know about, on the right side of a line that she had watched him walk her entire life. And those decisions were why, when he told a 25-year-old named Rico to step outside, the young man stepped outside. Not because Razor could hurt him, because Razor had earned the right to be listened to. Brandon Mercer had confused having money with having that. He had confused the appearance of power with the thing itself. He had spent his whole life in a town that deferred to his family name and mistaken the deference for something he had built. He hadn't built anything. He had inherited a stage, and he had used it to humiliate people. And when the audience finally stopped applauding and started recording instead, he had nothing underneath the performance to stand on. Friday morning, Robert Mercer's attorney called the police department again. This time, the duty sergeant transferred the call directly to Reyes. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. When it was done, Reyes drove to the Desert Rose. He sat at the counter. He ordered coffee. He waited until Maddie came over. "They want to negotiate," he said. Maddie looked at him. "Brandon won't contest the report. His father's attorney is proposing a formal written apology, a financial settlement for the fundraiser committee, and a signed agreement regarding contact with you going forward." He kept his voice level and factual. "They're also asking that the witness tampering call be treated as a separate and unrelated matter," which he paused, "which is not a decision I'm in a position to make." "What does that mean?" Maddie asked. "It means the call is already in the file," Reyes said. "What happens with it goes through the DA's office, not through a negotiation between his attorney and me." He looked at her. "That part is out of your hands and his." Maddie absorbed that. "What do I actually have to decide?" she asked. "The civil side," he said. "The apology, the settlement, the contact agreement. Those are yours." Maddie looked at the counter for a moment, at the grain of the old wood surface, at the coffee rings from decades of cups placed in the same spot by the same regulars who came every morning because this place felt like something solid in the world. "I don't want his money," she said. "Okay. I want the fundraiser committee to be made whole for the sponsors they lost." "That's not the same thing." Reyes made a note. "I want the written apology, to be honest," she said. "Not a lawyer's version of honest. Actual language that says what he did and acknowledges why it was wrong. If the attorney drafts it, I want the right to reject the language and request different language." Another note. "And I want no contact," she said. "Full stop. No negotiated distance. No occasional exception clause. No." Reyes looked up. "I'll convey that." He started to close his notebook. "Daniel," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said, "for remembering what you saw from the beginning. I asked you to remember and you did." Reyes was quiet for a moment. He was the kind of man who did not take compliments in the easy, dismissive way of people who are used to receiving them. He looked at her directly and let the thanks land and then said, "You made it easy to do the right thing. You showed up with the truth and you protected it. That's not nothing." He left. Maddie stood at the counter for a moment. Then Diane appeared beside her and set down a piece of pie on the counter without asking. "Eat," Diane said. You've been running on coffee and documentation for 2 weeks. Maddie looked at the pie. I'm fine, she said. You're also going to eat the pie, Diane said, and disappeared back into the kitchen. Maddie picked up a fork. She ate the pie, and outside, Red Mesa was continuing its ordinary Friday with the regular texture of a town that had seen something important inside it and was still working out what it meant. The way communities always work out what things mean, slowly and unevenly, and with significant amounts of disagreement along the way, but arriving eventually at some version of the truth. Brandon Mercer's name was not gone from the town. It wouldn't be. But something had shifted in the way it landed, something invisible but permanent. The way the weight of a word changes when the people saying it have been given reason to say it differently. The town had watched a woman collect donated envelopes off a pavement and stand back up and go back to work. It had watched her walk into a police station with a binder and a witness and a folder that documented 2 years of the truth. It had watched her refuse an apology that wasn't honest and refuse money that wasn't the point and refused to become cruel simply because someone had been cruel to her. And somewhere in the watching, without quite deciding to, the town had chosen. Not loudly, not all at once, but the way choices get made when they matter one person at a time, in the ordinary moments of ordinary days, by people deciding who they believed and why. The written apology arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Reyes had conveyed Maddie's terms to the attorney. It came by certified mail, which struck Maddie as an oddly formal method of delivery for something that was supposed to be personal, but she had stopped expecting Brandon to understand the difference between the form of accountability and the substance of it. She signed for the envelope at the front desk of the diner, carried it to the back office, and sat down before she opened it. Diane stood in the doorway. Do you want me to stay? Diane asked. No, Maddie said. I'm okay. Diane nodded and pulled the door almost shut, not all the way, because that was how Diane respected privacy, by leaving 1 inch of herself available just in case. Maddie opened the envelope. 2 pages. The first was a cover letter from the attorney explaining the structure of the agreement. She set it aside without reading past the first paragraph. The second page was the apology itself. And she could tell within the first 3 sentences that the language had been through at least 4 drafts. It had the particular smoothness of something that had been sanded down repeatedly, all the rough edges removed, all the specific words replaced with slightly safer synonyms. She read it twice. Then she put it down on the desk and looked at the wall. The apology said, essentially, that Brandon acknowledged his behavior at the fundraiser had been inappropriate and hurtful, that he regretted the impact of his words and actions, and that he committed to having no further contact with Madison Cole. It said this in 3 paragraphs of careful language that never once used the word wrong and never once said I should not have done, that only I regret that it happened, which was the specific construction of a man who had been advised to acknowledge consequences without admitting fault. She had asked for honest language. This was not honest language. This was the attorney's version of honest, which was a different thing entirely. Maddie picked up her phone and called Reyes. I got it, she said. And the language doesn't meet what I asked for. I want to send it back. A pause. You're sure? He never uses the word wrong. He never says I should not have done this. He says I regret the impact. She kept her voice level. That's not accountability. That's brand management. Reyes was quiet for a moment. The attorney is going to push back. Let him, Maddie said. I told you what I wanted. Honest language. Language that says what he did and why it was wrong. I meant it. Okay, Reyes said. I'll make the call. She hung up and looked at the 2 pages on the desk. Then she picked up the attorney's cover letter, turned it over to the blank side, and wrote 3 sentences in her own handwriting. Simple sentences. Direct ones. The kind that said exactly what happened and why it was wrong without any softening. She photographed them with her phone and emailed the photograph to Reyes with the subject line, "This is what honest looks like." Reyes called back in 2 hours. The attorney read your sentences, he said. He said they're too direct. That's the point, Maddie said. Brandon is apparently a pause. Brandon is apparently refusing to sign language that uses the word wrong in connection with his actions. Maddie sat down. Then he can explain that to the DA's office when they're reviewing the witness tampering call. A silence. I'll pass that along, Reyes said. The third draft of the apology arrived 4 days later. It used the word wrong twice. It said I should not have done what I did at the fundraiser. It said my behavior toward Madison Cole was wrong, and I have no justification for it. It was still crafted by an attorney. It still had the texture of something constructed rather than felt. But the words were there, actual and on paper, signed by Brandon Mercer with a signature that her father's handwriting analyst, not that she'd asked him to consult one. But Razor Cole had resources he deployed quietly and without announcement confirmed was not traced or coerced. Brandon had signed it himself. Maddie read it one time. She put it in the Manila folder. She did not feel triumphant. She had expected to feel something larger when this moment came, some release, some satisfaction, some version of the scene where the wronged person holds the document up and everything resolves into light. What she actually felt was quieter than that, more like the feeling of having been cold for a long time and finally stepping into a warm room and just standing there, adjusting. She went back out to the counter and poured Frank Dibble his 10th coffee of the week. You look different, Frank said. Different how? He considered it from behind his newspaper. Lighter, like something you were carrying got put down somewhere. Maddie refilled his cup. Something did. He nodded and went back to the crossword. The fundraiser committee received a check from Mercer Property Group 2 days later. The amount covered the value of the 3 withdrawn sponsorships plus a donation to the Red Mesa Family Support Fund that was, in Maddie's private estimation, sized to look generous rather than to actually be generous. But the committee accepted it. Carol Sims called Maddie to report the receipt with the tone of a woman completing a task on a checklist, which was, Maddie thought, exactly the right one for it. The witness tampering issue moved through its own channel, on its own timeline, handled by people in offices Maddie was not in. And she had learned from Reyes that these things took their own shape and that her job was to make herself available when asked, and otherwise to let the process work. She let it work. What she focused on instead was the thing she had started thinking about in the weeks after the fundraiser, in the quiet hours between closing the diner and falling asleep, when her mind was tired of the legal logistic and went somewhere more forward-looking. She had been collecting other people's stories for 3 weeks in comments, in the calls that came after the video spread, in Amanda's journal entries, and Carol's formal complaint, and the messages from strangers in cities she'd never visited who had seen 60 seconds of her standing in a diner and felt recognized. She had not asked for any of those stories. They had come because something in what happened had functioned as a door, and when a door opens, people walk through it. She thought about what to do with that. The idea that took shape was not dramatic. It was not a foundation or a nonprofit or a media campaign. It was simpler than that, which was why it felt right. She wanted to use the Desert Roses Community fundraiser the following year, the same event, the same square, the same town to raise money, specifically for the Red Mesa Women's Resource Network, which Maddie had discovered, in her research, had been operating on a fraying budget for years. Doing good work for women, leaving controlling situations, helping them find housing and legal support and employment, and doing it mostly invisibly because the people who ran it were too busy doing the work to spend time making themselves known. She brought the idea to Diane on a Friday afternoon after the lunch rush had cleared. Diane listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then she said, "You want to co-chair it?" "I want to chair it," Maddie said. Diane looked at her. "You're already managing this restaurant." "I know. You're also apparently in the middle of a legal process. That part is mostly waiting at this point." Diane leaned on the counter. "And you want to take on organizing a fundraiser?" "I want to build something," Maddie said. Not in response to Brandon. Not to make a point. "I want to build something because I have the energy to build something, and this is what I want to build." "There's a difference." Diane looked at her for a long moment with the focused, undeceivable attention of a woman who had spent decades reading people across this exact counter. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes what?" "Yes, I'll support it." Yes, I'll give you the flexibility you need. And yes, a pause. I want to talk to you about something else. About the restaurant. Maddie waited. Diane straightened. She had the look of someone who had been organizing the words for a while and was now using them before she could reconsider. I'm 62 years old. I have a daughter in Albuquerque. I don't see enough. I have a back that has opinions about the hours I work. And I have been thinking, for about a year now, that I need to think differently about what the next chapter looks like for me and for this place. Maddie was very still. I'm not going anywhere tomorrow, Diane said. Or next month. Or probably next year. But I want to start making arrangements. I want to start thinking about what it looks like to bring in a partner who knows this place as well as I do. Who loves it the way I do. Who would run it right. She looked at Maddie. There's only one person in my mind for that. Maddie's hands were flat on the counter. Diane, she said. I know what you make. I know what you have saved. Because I helped you set up the account when you first started, and I know you've been adding to it carefully for 3 years. I'm not asking you to buy me out tomorrow. I'm asking you to start thinking about a partnership structure, to start talking to a business attorney, to begin thinking of this place as partly yours, because in every way that matters, it already is. Maddie looked around the diner, at the counter with its coffee rings, at Frank Dibble on his stool, at the pass-through window where she had leaned 1,000 times between the back and the front, at the door with the bell above it that she had heard ring so many times it had become the sound of her life. She had walked into this place at 23 years old looking for a job and a way to build something entirely her own. And she had done that. And somewhere along the way, it had stopped being a job and become the thing itself, the proof of who she was when nobody was giving her anything. Okay, she said. Diane nodded once, with the economy of someone who got the answer they expected. Now, Diane said, can you tell Jess to restock the napkins before the dinner rush, or do I have to do everything myself? Maddie laughed. It came up unexpectedly, full and genuine, the kind of laugh that lives in the chest and comes out whole. She went to tell Jess about the napkins. 2 months after the fundraiser, Amanda Pryor drove back to Red Mesa. Not for legal business, this time that particular process had concluded with a formal agreement that Maddie was not at liberty to discuss in detail, except to say that it existed, and that its terms were fair, and that the witness tampering recording had played a role in making them so. Amanda drove back because Maddie had invited her, because they had started talking on the phone once a week in the way that two people start talking when they have recognized something in each other that neither of them had words for before. They had dinner at the Desert Rose after closing. Just the two of them and Diane, who had made food that she left on the counter with a note saying, heat this up, I have a life, and disappeared. Amanda looked around the empty diner with the lighting low and the chairs up on half the tables. This is a good place, she said. It is, Maddie agreed. Do you ever think about leaving? Maddie thought about it honestly. No, I thought I might when I was younger. I thought the point was to get somewhere bigger, but I don't think that anymore. She handed Amanda a plate. The point is to build something real. It doesn't matter what size it is. Amanda was quiet for a moment. Then, I've been thinking about what you said, about keeping records, about protecting the truth. She pushed her food around her plate. I want to do something with my documentation, not just file it and close the folder. I want it to be useful to someone. What kind of useful? I've been talking to an advocate. The one I mentioned before. She runs a support program, and she's looking for people who are willing to speak to other women who are in the middle of it. Not therapy, not official, just someone who has been where they are and came out the other side. Amanda looked at her. She asked me if I knew anyone else who might be willing. Maddie set down her fork. Yes, she said. The planning for the following year's fundraiser began in November. Maddie chaired the committee, which consisted of Carol Sims, who had apparently decided that showing up and doing work was more efficient than being asked, and 4 other women from the community who came to the first meeting with ideas that Maddie spent 3 hours writing notes from. Officer Sher agreed to provide a community safety liaison, the Red Mesa Women's Resource Network's director, A woman named Patricia Voss, who had been running the organization on termination and donated office supplies for 6 years, sat at the planning table with the careful attention of someone who has learned not to count on things until they arrive. "What's the goal?" Patricia asked at the first meeting. "We want to cover your operating expenses for the year," Maddie said. "Whatever you need to keep the doors open and the programs funded. We'll set the goal once I've seen your budget." Patricia looked at her. That's more than we've ever had." "I know," Maddie said. "That's the point." Carol Sims made a note on her legal pad. Maddie recognized the movement. It was the same movement Diane made when she crossed something off a list. The quiet satisfaction of a thing being decided that should have been decided long ago. 4 months before the second fundraiser, Diane put the partnership paperwork in motion. It took 3 months of meetings with an attorney not fast, because nothing real is fast. And then one afternoon, Diane put 2 copies of a document on the counter of the closed diner and pushed one across to Maddie and put a pen down next to it. Maddie looked at the document. "You should read the whole thing," Diane said. "I read the whole thing last night," Maddie said. "My father also read it." Diane raised an eyebrow. "Your father read a partnership agreement?" "He has a guy," Maddie said. Diane stared at her for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and signed her copy. Maddie picked up her pen and signed hers. They exchanged copies. They didn't hug. They were not particularly a hugging pair, but Diane held out her hand and Maddie shook it, and the firmness of the grip said everything the hug would have. "Don't mess up my restaurant," Diane said. "Our restaurant," Maddie said. Diane pointed at her. "Don't push it, partner. Spring came in the specific way it comes to the Arizona desert, not gently, but with purpose, the way the desert does most things. Burning off the cool of winter in a matter of weeks until everything is dry and clear, and the light has the quality of something direct and unsparing." Maddie had always loved the desert spring. She had grown up in it. It had the quality of honesty, no softness, no ambiguity, just the world exactly as it was under a sky that made no apologies. The Saturday of the second annual Red Mesa Community Fundraiser arrived the way the first one had arrived, with Diane standing at the back door complaining about supplies and Maddie holding a clipboard with everything already handled. Except this time the fundraiser was bigger. 3 times the number of vendor booths. 2 local radio stations had agreed to broadcast live. The Women's Resource Network had their own table, staffed by Patricia and 2 of her volunteers. Carol Sims's church group had expanded to 2 pie booths, which Carol said was a pie emergency, but which actually meant they had twice as much pie. The Desert Rose had the anchor booth, same as last year. Better organized, better equipped. Maddie had spent 2 weeks planning the logistics personally, in between managing the restaurant and reviewing the partner's financials and taking a call every Wednesday with Amanda, who had started formally volunteering with the advocacy program and had her first speaking event the previous week, and had called Maddie immediately after to say it had gone well, and also that she had cried in her car in the parking lot afterward, which Maddie told her was completely correct behavior. By 11 in the morning, the town square was full. By noon, the Women's Resource Network table had collected more donations than they usually raised in 6 months. Patricia came to find Maddie at the Desert Rose booth with an expression that Maddie had not seen on her face before, not just relief, which was Patricia's baseline expression, but something beyond it, something that looked like the face of someone who has finally gotten enough room to breathe. "Maddie," Patricia said. "I don't know how to." "Don't," Maddie said. "Just put it to work." Patricia looked at her. "You know, when I first heard your name, when the videos were going around, I almost called you. I wanted to reach out, but I thought she doesn't need one more person asking her for something." "I would have picked up," Maddie said. "I know that now." Patricia put her hand on Maddie's arm briefly, the gesture of someone who means it. "You built something real here." Maddie thought about Diane's word real, and Amanda using the same one at dinner in the closed diner, and the way the word kept returning as if it were the right word, the only word, for what she had been trying to do since she was 18 years old, and told her father she needed to find out who she was on her own terms. Real, not impressive, not visible, not powerful in the way that impressed people like Brandon Mercer. Just real solid, true, able to be touched and measured and relied upon. Thank you, Maddie said. Around 2 in the afternoon, she heard the motorcycles. Not a convoy this time. Not the rolling thunder of a formation, arriving with weight and numbers. Just a handful of bikes, 5, maybe 6 coming down the main street at road speed and pulling up at the edge of the square with the casual ease of people arriving at something they belong to. Razor Cole was at the front. He was wearing the same vest, same gray beard, same unhurried presence. He cut the engine and looked around the square with the expression of a man taking in something that pleasantly exceeds his expectations. And then he looked toward the Desert Rose booth, and his eyes found his daughter. He raised one hand. She raised hers back. He came through the crowd the way he moved through every room, not parting it dramatically, not demanding space, just moving with the consistency of someone who has never needed to announce himself, because the people who needed to know he was there always knew. He reached the booth and looked at the line of customers and the organized chaos behind it, and the signs and the donation jars and the Women's Resource Network banner 15 feet away. Big operation this year, he said. We have better planning, Maddie said. You had good planning last year. Better planning than that. She studied his face. He looked well, not rested, because Razor Cole had never been a man who appeared rested, but well in the more important sense, the sense of a person whose life still has the shape they want it to have. How was the drive? Good. Long, he looked at the booth. You need anything, she thought about it. Actually, she reached under the counter and produced an apron. Blue denim, Desert Rose Grill logo on the front. She held it out. He looked at it. He looked at her. Absolutely not, he said. She raised one eyebrow and held it steady. Graves, who had come in behind Razor and was already leaning on the counter with a coffee Jess had materialized for him, made a sound that was clearly a suppressed laugh. Something funny, Razor said without turning around. Nothing, boss, Graves said, and looked at the ceiling. Razor looked at the apron again, then at his daughter. He had the expression of a man doing a rapid calculation of dignity versus love and arriving at an answer he already knew before he started. He took the apron. He put it on. He did it in the way of a man who makes a decision completely once he makes it, no hesitation, no self-consciousness, just a straightforward choice to do the thing and the full commitment to doing it. He tied it at the back without asking for help and stepped behind the counter and looked at the grill with the focused attention of someone who actually knew what they were looking at. Needs doing, he said. Maddie stared at her father, the president of the Hells Angels chapter, feared, across 3 states, a man whose name had been used for 30 years to end conversations standing in a charity apron behind a grill at a community fundraiser in a town square, asking what needed doing. She handed him a spatula. Graves had stopped pretending to look at the ceiling. He was openly laughing now. Not one word, Razor said to him, pointing the spatula from you. Wouldn't dream of it, Graves said, and took a long drink of coffee. The afternoon moved the way good afternoons move faster than they should. Full enough that you don't notice the time going until you're looking at the angle of the light and realizing it's changed. Razor worked the grill with the seriousness he brought to everything. A woman in her 60s asked him who he was, and he told her he was the owner's father, and she said that was very sweet and asked him to make her burger medium well, and he made it exactly medium well. A small child asked him if he was a motorcycle man, and he said yes. And the child looked at the apron, and then back at him with the skeptical expression of a 6-year-old performing a fact check, and Razor said, I do many things, which the child apparently found satisfactory. Maddie watched from 2 feet away and did not bother hiding that she was watching. Around 4 o'clock, Frank Dibble appeared at the booth. This was unusual, because Frank was a creature of the indoors and had not, to Maddie's knowledge, attended an outdoor event in the 3 years she'd known him. He stood at the front of the booth and looked at the menu, and then looked at the gray-bearded man behind the grill with the apron. Is that, Frank started. My father, Maddie said. What can I get you, Frank? Frank looked at Razor for another second. Razor looked back at him with the neutral patience of a man who has been looked at strangely his entire life and no longer finds it particularly interesting. 2 burgers, Frank said. 1 for my wife, who is over there in the lawn chair and refused to come stand in line because her knees are bad. Tell her we'll bring it over, Maddie said. Razor made 2 perfect burgers. Maddie carried one of them across to Frank's wife, a small sharp-eyed woman named Barbara, who accepted the burger and looked at Maddie with the focused attention of someone who has been watching things unfold from a lawn chair and has opinions. You look happy, Barbara said. I am, Maddie said. Good. Barbara opened the burger wrapper with the efficiency of someone who had eaten 10,000 meals in her life and was not wasting time on ceremony. You know, I was at the fundraiser last year. I saw what that young man did. I know, Maddie said. I remember you being there. Barbara chewed thoughtfully. I almost said something. I thought about it. But you looked like you had it handled. I did, Maddie said. I know you did. That's why I didn't. Barbara looked at her. Some women need people to step in. You needed people to step back and let you finish. Maddie thought about that on the walk back to the booth. About the difference between the 2 things, stepping in and stepping back, and how both could be forms of support, and how knowing which was needed in any given moment was the thing that almost nobody got right. Her father had gotten it right, and it had surprised her, though it probably shouldn't have, because Razor Cole had spent 30 years reading rooms and knowing what they required. He had read his daughter's situations and understood that what she needed was not rescue. What she needed was a wall at her back, visible, solid, immovable, so that no one could come at her from behind while she faced forward. That was what he'd given her. That was what all of them had given her. In their different ways, Diane, with the security footage she'd been compiling quietly for months, Reyes with his careful memory, Carol with her formal complaint, Amanda with her 3-hour drive and her tabbed binder, Patricia with her presence at the planning table, Frank Dibble with his 10 years of morning coffee and the simple daily act of treating the diner like a place worth showing up to. None of them had fought her battle. Every one of them had made it possible for her to fight it herself. Near the end of the afternoon, when the crowd was beginning to thin and the donation totals were being tallied, and the cleanup was beginning in the easy collaborative way of people who have done this before, Maddie found a quiet moment at the back of the booth. She pulled out her phone. She had a text from Amanda. How's it going? She typed back, really well. Think we hit the goal. 3 seconds later, I'm crying in my kitchen. Tell me everything tonight. She smiled. She put the phone away. She thought briefly about the photograph. The one from last year, the one that had spread online. The image of her on her knees on the pavement of this same square, while Brandon stood over her laughing. She had not looked at it in months. She had made a conscious decision not to give it a central position in her memory, not because she wanted to pretend it hadn't happened, but because she refused to let it be the image she organized her life around. She knew what had happened after that photograph was taken. She had stood up. She had gone back to work. She had kept the evidence, found the witnesses, built the case, asked for help, accepted the help, refused to become someone who used cruelty to answer cruelty, and then she had turned back toward the thing she was building and kept building it. That was the story, not the photograph. What came after it? Razor untied the apron at the end of his shift and handed it back to Maddie with the expression of a man returning something he had borrowed and has no intention of making a habit of borrowing. Better be the last time, he said. I make no promises, she said. He almost smiled. The full version this time, it reached his mouth and his eyes simultaneously, which was rarer and meant more because of it. He looked at his daughter with the expression that she had seen on his face her entire life, at its most unguarded moments, the one that said, without any words required, that she was the best thing that had happened to him, and that he knew it, and that nothing he had ever done in his life was worth more than the fact of her. She put her arms around him. He held her the same way he always had, completely, the way you hold the people you would do anything for, without reservation or performance or any thought of how it looked. I'm proud of you, he said into her hair. "I've always been proud of you. But this year specifically, what you built here, I had help," she said. "You always need some help," he said. "That's not the same as not being the one who built it." She stepped back and looked at him. "Come for dinner next week," she said. "Real dinner. I'll cook. You'll make me drive an hour and a half for dinner. You drove 70 miles to stand in a square and watch me handle my problems," she said. "You can drive 90 minutes for a home-cooked meal." He looked at her. "Fine," he said. Graves, who had been waiting a respectful distance away, made a sound. "You're coming too," Razor told him. "Obviously," Graves said. The motorcycles left as the sun was going down over the desert, and Maddie watched them from the front of the booth until she couldn't hear them anymore. The sound faded the way it always did gradually, and then all at once, and then the ordinary sounds of the world came back in and filled the space where it had been. She turned back to the booth. There was cleanup left to do, and final donation counts, and Patricia Voss to find and give the total to, and a restaurant to lock up, and a week of regular work ahead of her, starting at 6 the next morning. She picked up a folding table. Carol Sims appeared beside her without being asked and picked up the other end. They folded it together. "Good year," Carol said. "Good year," Maddie agreed. They carried it to the van. Brandon Mercer was not in Red Mesa anymore. He had moved to Phoenix 3 months after the formal agreements were signed, which the town registered with the quiet, collective acknowledgement of a place that has finished deciding something and no longer needs to discuss it. His name came up occasionally in context, in the way of facts that are sometimes relevant, but it did not land the way it once had. It had no more weight than it deserved. He had wanted to define Maddie Cole. He had wanted to be the story she was part of, the reason she was noticed, the frame around her identity. Instead, he had become a lesson she no longer needed to keep learning. She had kept the original photograph, the one from last year, herself on the pavement, Brandon laughing behind her. She had printed a copy and put it in a frame. Not on the wall of the restaurant, not somewhere public, just in her home office, where she could see it if she chose to. Not to remind herself of the humiliation. To remind herself of what she had done immediately afterward. The woman in the photograph was on her knees, gathering envelopes on the pavement. The woman who kept that photograph was a co-owner of a restaurant, the chair of a community fundraiser, a partner to women who needed to know that what was done to them was not the end of their story, and a daughter who had finally learned that accepting love from the people who offered it honestly was not a surrender of independence, it was proof of it. Brandon Mercer had believed that a woman without a powerful man standing openly beside her must therefore have no power of her own. He had been wrong about that. In every way, a person can be wrong about something, wrong about what power was, wrong about what it looked like, wrong about where it lived, and catastrophically, irreversibly wrong about who he had chosen to underestimate. Maddie Cole knew exactly what she was worth. She had known it standing in the square on her knees, and she knew it standing behind the counter of her restaurant, and she knew it standing in the middle of a town that had watched her carefully and chosen, one person at a time, to stand on the same side as the truth. She had never needed Brandon Mercer to see it. She had only ever needed to see it herself. And from the very beginning, from the moment she stood back up, she had.